Hey, welcome back to Layers. This season we're going to be talking about the rebrand. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Dave.
How's things?
Good, very good.
Good. So yeah, we're going to be focusing in the next round of episodes are going to be focused in on the rebrand and specifically what goes into a rebrand, what to look out for in terms of the signs in your business that you need to rebrand, and a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, that's what this season's all about.
Cool.
So yeah, we're going to kick off today by talking a bit more about what actually you should look out for in your brand when things are starting to go a little bit pear-shaped or the business is tanking or you're trying to look at your future and possibly how rebrand plays into that. So let's start there. Signs to look for in your business. Let's talk through all the things that potentially could trigger a rebrand.
Yeah, I think rebranding is, I guess, a bit of a unique situation in the stage of any business. Can be a sign that things are going really well, or a sign that things aren't going so well. As to reasons why you might consider a rebrand. I guess the first place that I start is thinking about some of the themes that we talked about on the last season, where the brand should be a really authentic representation of the people and the business and everything they offer. So the obvious place to start is if that is no longer true because of a change in the business, then that's, I guess a broader theme or sign as to why you might want to consider a rebrand. You start out in one point in business and life, and things obviously change over time. So, that's going to trigger sometimes some pretty big changes in your business.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, actually. Like where you tend to have lost your relevance in your marketplace because you've stopped representing the culture and values.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely a trigger point for a lot of brands that we've worked with in the past.
So I guess then you start thinking about, like, what would some of those trigger points be? There's some blatantly obvious ones and some ones that we've encountered, like a merger. So you might have 3 or 4 disparate brands, that are suddenly coming together under a new banner. And so they're definitely going to need, a unifying brand, and that's even a sort of sub-challenge under this, unique sort of circumstance. So that's one thing.
Yeah, because you've really got kind of 2 paths you could go down. If you're merging with another company or another brand, you can either adopt somebody else's brands, like whoever.
Pick one.
Yeah, so either you can merge with that brand, or you can think about rebranding in its entirety, which offers a lot of opportunity as well too. And I think you got to think through the strategy of each of those options. If somebody has a really well established brand that's already out there in the marketplace, and it fits nicely with where you're trying to go in terms of your core joint mission together, then I think you're good to go down that path.
Yep.
But quite often you find when 2 businesses come together, or 3 businesses, or 4 businesses, like we've recently done before.
Yep.
That you tend to have this mixed pot of values and mission and what the vision should look like for the business.
Yeah.
And I think in that circumstance, like the rebrand makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It brings together, I guess, even some of the other benefits of branding in general, of, really getting everyone on the same page. If you do have those multiple businesses coming together.
Yep.
Might be a lot of opinions, so trying to get that straight is a good opportunity.
Yeah. So merger is number 1 on the list. So where there's a merge happening.
Yep.
What else do you think like triggers a rebrand? Like what's one of the other core triggers that we've come across in the past?
Certainly, if your services offering has changed, or your business model, something as core as that. Often, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to rebrand if you just say add a new service. But I think, that probably even brings up, I guess, a broader point, which is when we're talking rebrand, we're not just specifically talking about, say, changing your logo or picking a different color palette. It's as much about all those things that we talked about last time in terms of your positioning, your messaging, your strategy, those sorts of things. And that's where the change in services or business model is a good example to that, in the sense that just because, you add a new service doesn't necessarily mean you have to change your logo, but it may mean that you have to change your messaging and your positioning. You might go from being a specialist in one area to a generalist in a lot of different services. And so if you're going to make that sort of change, there's a big chance that your messaging and your positioning will need to evolve.
Right. So essentially what you're talking about is the fundamental story of the business has changed, but the front-facing communication and visual identity and ethos hasn't.
Yeah, exactly.
So you kind of get this mismatch that kind of happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've come across that scenario a lot, actually, and I would say that's probably one of the most common situations when it comes to rebranding is the story doesn't necessarily reflect what's happening in the business itself. So the business has matured or it's shifted, it's gone in a different direction.
Yeah.
I think that's a big factor, and that's one to watch out for. If you're a CEO or you're a brand manager, I reckon that's a big part of your job is to keep your finger on the pulse and make sure that you're always reflecting the core brand. And if it doesn't, then either you've got to figure out a way to kind of get it back on track, or you've got to think about a bigger fundamental change, which triggers a rebrand.
Yeah. And I think the thing to sort of contextualize that is you think about when most of the initial branding, messaging, positioning is done, and it's almost inherently has to be done before this business even exists, right? You think about the first time any new business ever does branding.
Yep.
It happens before they've served their first customer, because usually you need some sort of front-facing brand to go out there and start. So that's all based on assumptions and what you had planned the business to be and what you thought it would represent. And, a lot of that comes from the founder or, the initial team. But we know that's going to change over time. You'll get out there, you'll serve customers, you'll learn things from them. They'll ask for different services. You'll learn you're better at some things than you thought. Your team will come and go, things will evolve. So it stands to reason, I guess, that, those things that you originally set out with when you first founded the business are going to shift and change over time. Hopefully things like your mission and your passion don't, but certainly, some of that story that comes from that, will evolve and there'll likely be a point where you might have to change.
Yeah, I mean, is this a nuanced point as well too? This kind of leads into another, potential rebrand trigger point is that your brand is tied. So it hasn't necessarily... The core fundamental model hasn't really changed too much, but in terms of the way that you communicate and the way that your visual identity plays out in the market can become tight. And I guess why you see some of the big brands that have been around for a long time. Yeah, you're 20 years deep with a logo and a way of kind of messaging that brand, and all of a sudden you sound a bit stale in the marketplace. Yeah, is that another trigger point? Do you think for a rebrand?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think that, inherently styles change, customer preferences change, the especially if you're talking just purely on the aesthetics side of things, like the visual identity stuff, there is an element that, as superficial as it sounds, what people want to see and what they perceive as quality and trust and all those, things that we hope to represent, through a professional brand identity, they change, so it's very rare that a logo will be timeless forever. So that's definitely a part of it. I think the other side of the staleness argument too comes, even internally, does it just permeate this feeling of staleness across the team and the staff? Like they're not excited about the brand and out there championing, for it because they feel it's, doesn't again represent them anymore. It's a bit tired.
Yeah, I mean the one situation that comes to mind there, like if we were sort of talking about practical examples, is do you remember when Qantas did their rebrand? I mean, it's been a long time since they rebranded, but I remember distinctly back in the day when Virgin came into the market, and Virgin looked like the new, young, strong player, just completely fresh messaging. Their planes look better, and it made Qantas look really kind of old and tired. And so, I mean, that's an example of where, probably the fundamental model didn't really change that much. Qantas has always been that premium carrier, and they've gone for a different demographic as opposed to, say, Virgin. But that's where an example of where modernizing the brand because it was tired And that can mean like refitting the insides of your planes. It can be overhauling your staff uniforms. It could be...
Which is all brand experience.
It's all brand experience, yeah. But I think, in that example, that was probably a trigger point for a rebrand.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting about that, as you explained it, is their position hadn't changed, but it's almost like what represented that position had. So their old logo and whatever, when they first came out with it, would have represented prestige and premium, but what the market then saw as prestige and premium changed.
Yeah.
So they had to move to keep up with that. So as you say, it wasn't that what they were even trying to stand for changed, but how you represented and put forward that image did change. The market expectations for what premium and quality meant shifted. So they had to shift with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's interesting when you think about big companies as well too, because oftentimes with big companies, you get a CEO that has a tenure for 4 or 5 years, like if they're lucky, and then they tend to kind of be like either they've had enough and they're ready to exit out the door, or they get pushed out the door. But I think that's another interesting point to kind of talk about is like what happens when a new CEO comes into the hot seat.
Yeah.
Quite oftentimes that is also a trigger point. They're going to see the brand differently. They're going to have a new vision for it. And oftentimes I'll be working within the existing brand, but sometimes it's so fundamental to what they want to get done as a CEO, as a leader of a company, that can be a trigger point alone, is new personality coming into that leadership role. Yeah,
I mean, even other elements of the business, if it's in even just the marketing team having some changeover, or one of the other things that we see is sort of a trigger point is when businesses grow up, as we call it, so they've been more of that startup kind of brand for a few years, but the team's grown, the business has grown, they've become more sophisticated in what they offer, they've become more refined in their services and their positioning, so they sort of have this feeling of like, oh, we're a grown-up business now, we're not a startup anymore, so their startup branding might not feel, as sophisticated or as premium as or accomplished, I guess, as the business itself is. But that also, to me, ties into that idea of they might then be appointing a marketing person, to come in, and they've never had someone in that brand manager type role before. So to your point, they're going to inject, their own opinion and see things differently. Yeah,
absolutely. I think we should probably cover off in this podcast the wrong reasons to rebrand as well too. And funny enough, I've also got that on the other side of my ledger. We'll talk about that a little bit later, about people and why that is also, when you get new people coming into the business, why it could be potentially a bad idea to rebrand as well. But absolutely, I agree. Like, I think it's an opportunity when you have new people come into the business and they see things differently. Then that can trigger a rebrand. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about a fairly obvious reason to rebrand, which is that you look at your P&L and it's tanking, and you're wondering what the hell you're going to do as a business. A rebrand is one of those options that sort of sits in your arsenal for trying to turn things around. And quite often we'll get that call. So we know that there's businesses that have been in a difficult spot, and the rebrand is all about, differentiation, telling a new story, freshening up, going after a different part of the marketplace. But that's often a trigger point, right? Like, things are tough.
Yeah, exactly. And, as we've seen quite often, a misalignment with the brand is one of those reasons, and some of those other points that we already covered, the team's tired, they need a shot in the arm, and certainly the branding and perception that you're putting out there can help with that too.
Yeah, for sure. I also think about, like, what would be a trigger point for our own brand to be rebranded. And I actually think more future focused. Like, if I want to protect the moat that's around our business and around Ply, I would potentially rebrand based on where I want to be in the future as well too. So it's almost like a future proofing exercise more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting way to think about it too, in terms of what we were talking about before of like, oh, my service model has changed. Well, it might be that as you say, it's not even necessarily what you're doing now or have been doing historically for the last few months or whatever in terms of new services. It might be, I want to attract these new types of clients, or I want to offer these new types of services, and how do I project that image, as you say, of like, we can definitely do this, we're capable, or, you know, you should come to us for these reasons. It may be sort of getting more on the front foot than a reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I actually just came to me now, but like with a P&L type scenario where the business is tanking,
yep,
or it's just not making sense because you can't achieve the price that you want for the thing that you sell, whether it's a widget, whether it's a service.
Mm-hmm.
The rebrand makes a lot of sense purely from a tactical standpoint in terms of being able to charge higher prices.
Yeah.
We know that there's a lot of scientific kind of evidence around this, that you can actually charge more for a product or a service where the perceived brand has more value.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that might be another interesting trigger point as to why you might even consider the rebrand as well.
Yeah.
Is to actually make that balance sheet look a lot stronger.
Yeah, and I think the pricing one is actually a big one under that banner.
Yeah.
As you say, it's very hard, I guess, to keep ticking your prices up, you know, with the same perception in the market. If you want to be more premium, you're going to need a more premium brand and image.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's almost like the forgotten strategic layer in all of this is that you can elevate pricing when you do a rebrand. And oftentimes we don't really kind of think about that so much, but it's kind of like a byproduct of a rebrand. But such a critical, fundamental way of improving your business model.
Yeah.
So
I guess the flip side of that, though, a bit of a transition into some of the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And the only reason I bring that up is that the flip side of that is to be aware that it's not just going to magically fix everything. You know,
Yes.
a rebrand is not some golden bullet. And I think particularly if it's driven for the wrong reasons, you know, like if it's not coming from, you know, an honest and reflective place of, well, this is our new strategy or this is our new business model and this brand really represents it. If it's more just, oh, let's, you know, slap a new coat of paint on it, do something that looks flashy but isn't necessarily the best representation of us, but just because we think, you know, in the short term it's going to, you know, return a few extra customers, but it's too short-term focused. I think that's actually a bad idea.
That's a big one. I agree. Like if the business model is broken and you're just going to whack a new brand on it and hope that things are going to be like kosher, you're probably going to end up like really disappointed and actually probably going to end up broke.
Yeah, well, you spend a bunch of money on the rebrand as well as not see the results.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, a rebrand is a big undertaking if you're going to do it properly. And you know, it's going to be a diversion of resources for a period of time to make a rebrand happen. And yeah, I mean, if it's not for the right reasons, as you say, it's got to be coming from a good place of, okay, we've done the hard work to try and figure out our business model. Now we just need to go out there and we need to create that layer on top, that brand layer. So yeah, I think that's a huge one.
Any other poor reasons to rebrand?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about people before, and this one's really nuanced. But what can happen, I think, in a brand is that you have an influx of, like, it could be a person or it could be a couple of new people that come into your business. And this happens particularly for small, I think, and medium-sized businesses. They might have a bunch of new ideas. They might come to the table with, you know, maybe a little bit of strategy that they've taken from another business that they've been in and want to come and apply it to the business that they've just joined. And that may alter the course of a business, but not in the right way. And where you've already got a good business model and the strategy's working and, you know, the profit and loss looks really good, it can be a temptation to kind of go after the new shiny object. And people are often championing, they're behind that when you have an influx of new people. So I think you just got to be careful when you get new people coming into your business that you don't just kind of jump at the new shiny way of doing things. You've got to make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, I think for me that's sort of this bigger theme almost of a rebrand for rebrand's sake.
Yes.
And I think it is, as you say, the new shiny thing because, let's face it, like getting a new brand is fun. A lot of people have interest in design or, fancy themselves, to have a great eye for design and those sorts of things. So it's an exciting project, to be involved of and to spark. And we even talked about this, I guess, a lot on our own about how much, you often do want to make your mark, in your role, in your business. And one way to do that is to have a heavy influence, on the branding.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a danger to see it as a sexy, fun thing to do and push for it, even if that's a little bit subconsciously. But as you say, it's got to be for the right reasons and have more to it than, I don't really like that logo and someone else made it, so I'm going to make a new one.
Yeah, and I think this is a big one for brand managers and for founders or CEOs to just really kind of think through and make sure that they're making the right decisions around a rebrand. And for all the reasons that we've kind of already outlined before, you just got to make sure that you're doing it because you're trying to grow the business, or that there's a fundamental like flaw in the business that needs to be fixed from a model standpoint. The other one that comes to mind for me is that, and this is less of a less important, I would say, but like just rebranding because you see somebody else's logo that looks really cool, and you want to kind of get like, you got a little bit of FOMO about what other brands are doing. They've got the new cool typeface. That's not a good reason to rebrand.
No, I mean, I had something similar down in terms of just following trends. As you say, it's you just especially if you subscribe to some design newsletters or whatever, you're always seeing something that you're like, oh, that's so cool, or that's way better than what we've got. But that's not a strong enough reason.
For sure, I definitely think that's a big one.
You got any more, or we're done talking ourselves out of work here?
I mean, I had a couple of others. Just to kind of finish on a couple of other reasons why you might consider a rebrand, or what might be a really good trigger point. Reputation, I think, specifically, like, and this plays into more the new CEO coming into a role, but like where you take over a company where it's got a pretty shitty reputation, that is a great trigger point for a rebrand, because you might be carrying a lot of that legacy, a lot of bad vibes with customers. You're a bit broken in the marketplace, and I think that's a good opportunity to kind of repaint the story. So reputation, I think, is a great trigger point for a rebrand.
I almost think about the analogy that we had in the first episode of last season, where we talked about the idea that your brand's like a bucket, and all the customer experiences that people have and individual have goes into filling up that bucket. That's almost like tipping out the bucket to try and start again. It's never going to be a completely clean, fresh start, but certainly can assist when there's some of those bad vibes.
And the final one I've got on my list is that I've had this situation before, in that you have a founder who has been running at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So it's just more applies to a startup situation, like running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, didn't do the brand process properly, has found traction at some point. The business is going okay, but they recognize that they didn't do the brand right in the first place. So they might even just only have a logo. They never even thought about messaging. They never thought about all the other brand elements. They never thought about the experience for the customer. They just didn't do any of those other layers.
For sure.
And so they've just been running so fast on it that when they finally catch their breath and realize their brand is pretty average, that is a great opportunity to come back and think about a rebrand. So as a trigger point,
I guess the final thing that I just wanted to touch on was just, and I guess we'll go deeper into all these things, but what are some of the considerations that someone needs to think about if they are considering a rebrand? For me, it's things like, how do you keep your current clients engaged? You're making a change, and you might have some level of brand loyalty, even if you might have some of these other problems that we're talking about. So you got to think about that. And staff, goes along with that too. So how do you keep them engaged, or get them really excited about a new brand? who should be involved, in the process. It shouldn't just be the brand manager. It might be, some other people. And also just, I guess, understanding that it doesn't have to be a case where the entire brand gets thrown out. We've had situations where something like the logo might endure, but, the messaging and positioning changes and stuff like that. So I guess there's going to be a lot to talk about, but
yeah, I think that's a nice little teaser for where we're going to go next, because I think there's a lot of good territory to cover there. So. Yeah. All right, well, that's a nice place to kind of wrap up for today. If you do want to dig further into these topics, you can definitely go to ply.studio. You can read some of our blog posts about some of these topics on there. Or if you want to listen to other things regarding brand building and how to build a bit more depth into your brand, you can go to the Layers podcast website. That's it for today, MC.
Nice.
Thanks for chatting.
Welcome back.
Yeah, cheers. Welcome back to you.
Thanks, Dave.
Cheers.
See ya.